For months, Ukraine has wanted to use American missiles against Russian territory. Now, outgoing President Joe Biden has given the go-ahead in a significant change in US policy. So, will this turn the tide of the war? And how will Russia respond? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. US President Joe Biden is lifting restrictions on the use of American tactical missiles against Russian territory. This is a major shift in US policy. Previously, Washington has only allowed the use of its weapons in occupied Ukrainian territory. And it comes just weeks before the end of Biden's term. President-elect Donald Trump has said he will end the war quickly. President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly stated the use of American weapons on Russian soil would mean NATO was at war. So what are the reasons behind Biden's decision, and could it turn the tide for Ukraine? We'll discuss this with our panel of guests in a moment, but first, this report from Dmitry Medvedenko.
Permission to use Western-supplied weapons against targets in Russia is something Ukraine has wanted for years. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy included it in his so-called victory plan presented to allies last month. After the first media reports that Washington had given the green light, he had this to say.
Strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves. They certainly will.
The US has been sending Army Tactical Missile Systems, or ATACMS, to Ukraine since last October. But troops were only allowed to use them inside Ukrainian territory, including Russian-annexed Crimea. Now they could strike targets up to 300 kilometers from the front lines. This means up to 245 military sites are within range, according to the Institute for the Study of War. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, says Europe should follow suit and grant similar permission.
I've been saying once and again that Ukraine should be able to use the arm we provided to them in order to not only to stop the arrow, but also to be able to hit the Arcus. I continue believing this is what has to be done.
Moscow has stated multiple times that the use of Western-made weapons against targets in Russia is a red line. The Kremlin expanded its military policy in September to allow nuclear strikes in response to conventional arms that threaten its sovereignty. And President Vladimir Putin warned that the use of American tactical missiles would mean direct NATO involvement, and Moscow would respond.
It is not about allowing the Ukrainian regime to strike Russia with these weapons or not. It is about making a decision about whether NATO countries are directly involved in the military conflict or not. If this decision is made, it significantly changes the very essence, the very nature of the conflict. And we will make appropriate decisions based on the threats that will be created for us.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has accused the US of intensifying the war.
It is obvious that the outgoing administration in Washington intends, as they said earlier, to continue adding fuel to the fire and further provoke escalation of tension around this conflict.
The policy change comes in the final weeks of Joe Biden's term in office. President-elect Donald Trump said he intended to end the war in Ukraine swiftly without elaborating what his plan would entail. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's get further insights with our guests. From Moscow, we're joined by Andrei Fedorov, a former Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia and Chairman of the Fund for Political Research and Consulting. In Birmingham in the UK is Stefan Wolff, a Professor of International Security at the University of Birmingham. He focuses on competition between global powers. And in Kyiv is Yulia Kazdobina, a Senior Fellow in Security Studies at Ukrainian Prism, a think tank. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Yulia, in Kyiv, I'll start with you. So will the decision by Joe Biden to allow the use of tactical weapons to hit Russian territory make a difference to the war for Ukraine?
Well, actually, when yesterday, when the news broke that the decision was granted, it was a big elation at home because people believe that granting Ukraine the opportunity to strike targets deep in the Russian territory, and we mean military targets deep in the Russian territory, will help us gain an advantage, at least a partial advantage. But then this morning, this elation was to a large extent gone because Western media reported that the permission was actually very limited. It was not the permission to strike any military target in the Russian territory that is within range of these missiles, but only those targets that are located in Kursk Oblast of the Russian Federation, where now the North Korean soldiers are stationed and are actually involved in fighting the Ukrainian army. And so this is seen more as a signal to North Korea to stay out of the fight, and not so much as something that is going to help Ukraine win this war.
Stefan, what do you think? Will it make a difference for Ukraine? And as if it is, as Yulia suggests, it's restricted to where North Korean troops may or may not be, would it impact the long-term course of the war in Ukraine's favour?
I don't think it's in any way going to make a major change in the overall trajectory of the war. So I think we have to be quite clear here that this decision, if it really would have been meant to enable Ukraine to win this war on the battlefield, should have been made probably 2 or 2.5 years ago, and not on the eve of the 1000th day of war, of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. That said, I think it's very important that the decision has been made nonetheless. Given that whatever Donald Trump might be planning, it looks like he will impose a ceasefire along the front lines as they exist at the moment when he tries to make his deal. So from this perspective, anything that can help Ukraine now will be beneficial when it actually comes to the likelihood of a Trumpian deal.
Andrei, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says if such a decision has been taken, it means a whole new spiral of tension that the Biden administration is adding fuel to the fire. Our two other panellists don't think it's going to make that much of a difference given the restrictions placed on how the weapons can be used. What would Moscow see from this change in tactic?
First of all, from my personal point of view, according to my knowledge, there are no so-called restrictions. There is a flexibility, and of course there is some argument concerning Kursk Oblast, but in fact in this Kursk region, use of this ATACMS missiles is simply senseless, because there is no any kind of serious front line in Kursk Oblast, and there are no any kind of huge military facilities which can be the target.
But is the idea,
from Russian point of view,
well, excuse me, Andrei, though, is the idea perhaps to scare off the North Koreans, as Biden has suggested?
No, it's not the thing, because it has nothing with North Koreans. Because the main target for these missiles, of course, are Russian airfields, which are outside of Kursk area, but these Russian airfields are used for making strikes in Kursk area against Ukrainian troops. So the problem for Kremlin is that it looks at the whole situation as new stage of escalation, because no one in Kremlin believes that it will be limited to Kursk Oblast or something else. And the problem for Moscow today is how to respond. There are different views yet, and there are no final decision, because, as it was said today, decision will be made only after things will happen. But I can foresee a new stage of escalation, and I think so that this step can simply kill Trump's peace plan.
OK, thank you. Yulia, Stefan's touched on this a moment ago. Is it too late anyway? This has happened when Ukraine has been given tanks and fighter jets that it's asked for months after they asked for them. You think this is too late?
Well, unfortunately, it is. It's been the Western policy from the very beginning that they were giving Ukraine weapons too little, too late. And so that was able to keep Ukraine in the fight, but not actually able to deal a decisive victory or decisive strike on the Russian Federation. And it's precisely this logic that the threats from the Russian president that if the West decides to help Ukraine more, then it's going to face retaliation. And so this leads to self-deterrence by the Western powers. And it turns into a very strange situation when actually Russia is the country who is committing the aggression and at the same time accusing Western countries of aggression while they're only helping Ukraine to fight back and to survive.
Stefan, on a practical level, won't Russia just sort of move materiel or troops that might be targeted further inland, further out of the range of these missiles? It might not hurt Russia that much in the end.
Well, I think that there are certain logistical difficulties involved in that, of course. I mean, that's not necessarily something that can be done all that easily overnight. Plus, in addition, I mean, also nobody knows exactly how large the stockpile of ATACMS, for example, is in Ukraine. So is that really something that Russia needs to be deeply concerned about if there is only maybe a couple of dozen of those missiles where Russia could very well sit out any strikes, using also its quite well-established and deeply entrenched air defenses in sort of defense against these possible attacks. On the other hand, I also think we should not forget that Russia, of course, is not going to just take this without any responses. I don't believe that there's any danger at the moment of anything like nuclear escalation that Putin has threatened at various points. And Russia will need to be quite careful in terms of how it positions itself in relation to this new situation. As Mr. Fedorov said, in light of the fact that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States, inaugurated in January 2025, and there will be a diplomatic initiative on his part to bring this war to an end.
Andrei, we understand there was debate within the Biden administration over whether to allow these weapons to be used in Russian territory, and there were those who feared that it could cross a Russian red line, provoke a wider conflict. Is that a concern you share?
Yes, it's a concern because the problem is also that Russia cannot leave such step without answer. Of course, very much will depend what kind of strikes, what kind of targets will be under fire. And out of this, there will be a response from Russia. It can be strikes or further strikes on energy and military infrastructure of Ukraine. I cannot exclude 100% that in certain moment there can be some statements that Russia is still nuclear power and new conception of a nuclear security, nuclear strategy can give a chance to use it if it's needed. But I don't think it will happen. Anyway, escalation is coming. Escalation is coming, and more closer to Trump's inauguration, more escalation we might see.
Yulia, Andrei there says escalation is coming. Do the Ukrainians hope that the UK and French Storm Shadow missiles might now be authorized for use to target Russian territory, and maybe even the Germans' Taurus cruise missiles? Is that a hope from Ukraine that they'll get access to yet more?
Well, we've actually received the permission to use the French and the British Scalp missiles already. And we have received the answer from the German Bundeskanzler Scholz that Taurus are not forthcoming and that Germany is actually opposed to escalation. But we understand that the only way to actually try to get out of this conflict is to approach negotiations from the position of strength. And so we are hopeful. I mean, we do want to resolve this war. We do want to stop the war, but we also want to achieve just peace. And we believe that any weapons that can be supplied to us that will allow us to diminish Russian threat, and just as our Russian panelist mentioned, that strikes on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure will continue. So they have been going on for quite a while. And you're showing now pictures of civilian Ukrainians who are just staying in their own homes and getting killed every single day. And so we are hopeful that we will get those and we will be able to stop more Russian planes from attacking us.
Stefan, why do you think Biden is doing this now?
Well, I mean, this is everybody's guess in a way. I mean, if I were to speculate, I mean, my sense is that what Biden is trying to do now is basically shore up the Ukrainian position in advance of whatever Donald Trump's big push for ceasefire, for peace agreement might be. As I said earlier, I mean, this is likely going to freeze the front lines at wherever they are at the time when Trump makes his big push. And so any gain that Ukraine can now make and any loss that it cannot or that it can avoid to take now is, I think, going to be very important in the long run here. So I think in that sense, this is very much sort of a last hurrah on Biden's part. And he may at least be able to spare Ukraine from a very humiliating defeat at the negotiation table with Trump and Putin. So I think in that sense, again, it's too little too late to win the war, but it may just be in time to actually even the battlefield, even the playing field out a little bit in Ukraine's favor now.
And Andrei, how do you assess Biden's timing? Is it to try and shore up Ukraine ahead of perhaps inevitable negotiations next year that Moscow would be invited to take part in by Trump?
First of all, I don't believe in any negotiations because all the points of Trump's plan, which I know, they are absolutely unsuitable to Moscow. And what is important for Ukraine now is to keep the front line, because if finally there will be some contacts, not negotiations, but at least some contacts on certain agreements, it will be very important where the front line is. And from this point of view, appearance of new missiles, both from US, France, and UK, can help Ukrainian army to keep the line.
Andrei, we understand, Vladimir Putin has said in the past, the Russian president, that any negotiations or talks about Ukraine would have to reflect the sort of realities on the ground, a suggestion that Ukraine would have to cede territory. But that's what Trump may offer, we understand, isn't it? Isn't that acceptable to Moscow as a starting point?
No, but there are no elements in Trump's plan which are acceptable. Moscow is against freeze on the current existing line. Moscow is demanding international recognition of 4 territories which are included in the Russian constitution. Moscow is demanding never membership in NATO. Moscow is demanding denazification, in fact, the change of the political system of Ukraine, etc. So, plus, of course, the question of sanctions. And all of this, from my personal point of view, makes any talks at this stage are simply impossible.
Yulia, do you think the Ukrainian president is preparing his country for the inevitable, that there will have to be talks, that they can't win militarily. He said on Saturday that Zelenskyy said on Saturday that Ukraine must do all it can to ensure the war with Russia ends next year through diplomacy. He concedes that the battlefield situation in eastern Ukraine is difficult. He says Russia's making advances. So Ukraine is going to have to give way on territory, perhaps, in any talks?
Well, this is not something that President communicates domestically, and actually this position to cede territory to the Russian Federation is not supported by a majority of Ukrainians. And also we understand that Russian war aims in Ukraine are not limited to making some territorial gains. We understand that their war aims are a lot bigger than that. From the very beginning, when they talk about denazification, when they talk about demilitarization, right? And they never change that position. And what it means is that they want to change Ukrainian government. They want they actually don't recognize the existence of the Ukrainian nation. And we see what they're doing in the occupied territories, eliminating everything Ukrainian. And so when people talk about inevitable concessions, that they need to take into account all of these things that have happened and that are happening, and all the statements that the Russian Federation makes, and also the experience that we've had previously negotiating with Russians when we could never actually establish the ceasefire, because they always maintained both the ability and the intent to continue the war while talking about negotiations. And so with this position, if President Zelenskyy voices it domestically that we're going to make concessions, it's not going to find support among Ukrainians, no matter how hard it is to continue fighting and to continue standing up to this aggression.
Well, just quickly, Yulia, on that point, I mean, we've had a recent poll from the Kyiv's International Institute of Sociology. It says 32% of respondents to a recent poll said they're ready to give up some territory for an end to the war and a preservation of independence. That's up 14% from a year earlier, although, of course, still the majority not prepared to give up territory. But it's changing. Opinion is changing, isn't it?
The opinion is changing, it's true, but I think part of the reason is that we were thrust into this false dichotomy that it's territories for peace, and it's based on the assumption that if we give territories to Russia, then it's going to bring peace. But this is not true. It's not going to happen, because Russia is not about taking part of Ukrainian territory. Russia is about destroying Ukrainian statehood.
All right. Stefan, do you think Zelenskyy, again with the new permissions given to him by Biden, is readying himself to try and take tactical positions ahead of the inevitable talks that Trump will make him have with Russia?
I think that is very much the case. We also shouldn't forget that these concessions do not necessarily need to be permanent. I mean, some of the scenarios that people are talking about, like the Korean scenario or the so-called West German scenario, they do not necessarily trade territory permanently for a ceasefire. So if you look at the German experience, for example, I mean, there we had two German states for 40 years. And in the end, when the Soviet Union crumbled, unification was possible. In the Korean case, we have had a ceasefire in place since the early 1950s. With no recognition on either side of this being a permanent state of affairs. So I think in that sense, concessions do not necessarily have to mean permanently giving up territory. I think the other part that is quite important here is to bear in mind that Biden's decision now in some ways also makes it easier for Trump potentially to achieve his goals. Because it was not at all clear, and still is not at all clear, that Russia is actually going to be all too keen on a ceasefire as long as it has the momentum on the ground. And clearly Russian gains in particular in the Donbass area and also more recently around Kharkiv certainly puts Putin in a much, much stronger position. Now, with Biden leveling the playing field, Trump himself will potentially have more leverage to say to Putin that he needs to come to the negotiation table, it needs to do so with a degree of sincerity.
And so quickly from you, Andrei, is that how Moscow might see this, that the playing field is being levelled in readiness for what Vladimir Putin himself would see as an inevitable return to the negotiating table when Trump takes power next year?
Well, it depends, first of all, on Trump. If Trump will propose something concrete, something reasonable from Moscow's point of view, yes, there might be contacts, there might be telephone conversations, there might be some kind of teams formed on each side, but I'm not sure that it will happen. First of all, because really the Trump's plan positions there in contradiction with the situation on the battleground. And for Russia, as many Russians are saying, to freeze the situation means moral defeat.
All right. OK. Just very last question to you, Stefan, a quick answer if you can. Are we heading towards an end game here? And is it making other former Soviet satellites nervous, like Georgia, Moldova, the Baltic countries? And should they be nervous?
I think we always have to be nervous for two reasons. One is that Russia under Putin clearly has very strong, very aggressive imperial ambitions. It's a revanchist, revisionist state. And on top of that, we now have an incoming president in the United States who is very unpredictable. That doesn't necessarily mean bad news all around. But it means a very great difficulty in terms of planning for Kiev and for its European allies in particular.
All right. Well, we're out of time, I'm afraid. But thanks to all our guests, to Andrei Fedorov, to Stefan Wolff and Yulia Kazdobina. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here, bye for now.